together be in fellowship with the bishop and H. Mark, our deacon, and the bishop's husband, Mark. This is a time where she can speak with us, and we can, as I've been telling you for weeks, ask any question. So Lorelai's probably got great questions. Any question you like about the bishop, about the diocese, about her history, about our relationship, whatever comes to mind for you.
Don't be shy. I'm really, if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that too.
So I'll ask, I'll plant the seed.
Okay.
Oh, there's others too. So you were saying that you were a bishop in Nebraska? Or assistant bishop?
North Dakota.
North Dakota, sorry.
Oh, wow.
So did you go from there to here? Because I know you've helped with the transition ministry, if I got it right, in the diocese here.
We moved here in 2014. We live in Haverhill, up the road a piece. And I was serving, actually at that point, I just finished up in North Dakota and was serving in as assistant bishop in Montana, half-time, and directing something called the Bishop's Native Collaborative, helping raise up Native leadership and training. So one of the reasons why we settled in this part of the world is Alaska Air flies out of Boston. And that was one of the requirements that the board of the Bishop's Native Collaborative wanted. And I could get to Montana very easily. Alaska Air, so we were all set up.
How to choose a place to live.
How to choose a place.
By the hub. Okay.
But we also have a daughter that was living in the area, and our youngest, and our oldest daughter moved to Maine a year and a half ago. So the two of them are here. We have one daughter who lives in Pennsylvania. So yeah. And then I started as regional candidate for the central region, which you're not part of because you're Martha's, right?
We're Martha's.
So the three of us started in 2018 as regional candidates. But it was a lot easier commute than flying to Montana.
Got it.
Every couple weeks. So. Okay, other question here.
I don't have a question, but friends.
Uh-oh.
Our friends were busy during church with our Sunday school, and
Okay.
we made a project, and they would like to present this to you
Oh.
on behalf of the kids.
Oh, wonderful, thank you.
Oh, wow.
You did all of this today? Can I hold it up?
We haven't made a craft for Bishop Adams, he should be jealous.
I'm telling you. Thank you very much. Thank you again. The light will shine right through it. That's beautiful, thank you all.
What grief, if any, do you get for being a female bishop?
There's another one for me? No. You're showing me yours, right? You made one to take home? Okay, so you put yours up in the window, and then I'll have mine in my window, and I'll think about you all, okay? We'll think about each other, all right? No.
I know her.
Okay, we're gonna go find it.
Jillian.
When I was first in the House of Bishops, there were only a handful of us. And Bishop Gail Harris, who was up until very recently was here and has been a dear friend of mine. She and I were the only two women of color in the House of Bishops. That's beautiful. Jillian.
Very.
You did a beautiful job. Believe it or not, they used to call us by each other's names. And Gail is very beautiful, but I don't think the two of us look alike at all. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was just, to me, that was a sign that they were just knew that we were the two women of color in the house, and that was about it. We have when Barbara went to Lambeth the first time, Barbara Harris, she was yelled at and those kinds of things. I mean, I think we've all, when I was first ordained a priest, it was very hard for people in some ways to get used to women clergy. And I grew up in the Presbyterian church, and in fact, I'll tell you a story which always cracks everybody up, but I grew up, my dad was a Presbyterian minister, I'd only seen men as clergy, so I tried to convince Mark that he was being called to the ministry.
How did that go?
His answer was brilliant. He said, look, if God was calling me, he would call me directly and not use me as the operator. So I had to deal with it. My dad was actually very supportive. And I said, well, maybe I should just go and get a degree in Christian education. And his answer was, if God is calling you, you need to do this, and nobody respects Christian educators. But I mean, in some ways, that was the truth. I mean, and they were very supportive. And that wasn't, it was a challenge for him sometimes, but he was really very supportive. And
Would you mind telling Elizabeth what happened in Lambeth when you arrived? You told us at the clergy prison mass about the
I ruptured my Achilles tendon the first night we were at Lambeth this past summer. So English Health Service was lovely. And they gave me, this is like the 4th or 5th boot, but the boot they gave me, similar to this, they call them Beckham boots. So they pushed me around at Lambeth, and one of my friends, we were at some gathering at Canterbury, and we're on a break, and these two priests from Sudan, two bishops from Sudan came up to me, and I wasn't sure if they were upset with me or, so we had a conversation, my friend Mike Smith and myself, and basically they were excited to know that even though I was crippled, I could serve as a bishop. But the expectation of them that they have to be perfect at all times, and they can't have any problem.
Yeah.
And so I was first surprised by it, but then realized what a gift it was to have that conversation and be able to witness to them and them to me. So, thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
There's a question.
Here.
As an engineer, that was a woman, I had similar problems. Women can't do anything. I was an engineer.
Wow.
You did just fine.
More than fine.
Yeah. There are struggles. I mean, it really is not always easy. And my challenge is that I try not to be strident or angry about it. There are times when it's easy to get angry. And yet, I've often learned that if I sit people out in conversation, I can figure out why they're anxious or uncomfortable, as like we did with the bishops from Sudan. Yeah.
Getting angry is
Not worth it. Right.
No, it isn't worth it. There was another question.
Tim?
Yeah, sure. So there was two things, actually. One thing, I kind of relate to what you were saying. I was born with one hand, but when I was 12 years old, I really wanted to be a priest, and I was an altar boy, and I was Roman Catholic. And the priest talked to my parents to taught me how to be a priest, because with a physical deformity, I could be a priest. So I know what you're saying about that. But the other thing that was more important was when you were talking about how the Trail of Tears in the 1830s, they actually had been Christian for a couple generations. I never knew that. Were they mostly a certain denomination, or was it just all a mixture? Because I know when my daughter was in the Peace Corps, went to Tonga, and I was surprised at how many different Protestant denominations were even in a small island like Tonga, you know, it's like, but yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Thank you for your story about, Mark's uncle wanted to be a priest as well. And he too was born with only one hand, and so that was pretty standard in, issue, you have to be perfect to be a priest, yeah. I can vouch for the fact that none of us are perfect.
I'm not perfect. Are you perfect?
No. Whether it's visible or invisible, we're all, not perfect.
And I can report that Tim is a great priest. If you believe in the priesthood of all believers, Tim is a great servant.
Actually, the mostly congregational in North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, they actually, there's a suit that went all the way to the Supreme Court called Worcester versus the state of Georgia, which the Supreme Court decided in favor of the Cherokee people and this suit. It was, but he was one of the missionaries or clergy with them. And then the president said, too bad, and defied the Supreme Court and made us walk, make my people walk the Trail of Tears. So yeah, Jackson didn't care. But yeah, so by the time in Oklahoma there were more Baptists, and the Anglican Church in this part of the world, there were quite a few chapels very early on. The Onondaga and the Mohawk, all of the, were all had very early missionaries from the Anglican Church. This part of the world was very congregational, and Massachusetts colony was really very congregational. So it really depended on where people landed. I was elected in Southern Virginia and served in Southern Virginia. The 11 tribes in Virginia have been fighting for federal recognition for generations, and many of them finally got it. But when we were working with them years ago, we were at a meeting and somebody said, you just want this federal recognition so you can have casinos. And one of my friends, one of the chiefs said, no, we can't have casinos. And whoever this, very full of themselves person was said, well, why not? Why not? And he just said, we're all Baptists. So the Episcopal Church, or its predecessor, the Anglican Church, gave up on a lot of Native people, very early on in some places and not in others. So it was just, and it was sort of like, by the time we got to the end of the Civil War, at that point, there really wasn't a lot of separation of church and state. So they divided up territories with various different denominations. So that's why you have, we've heard of this in very recent times about the Indian schools and all of the abuses that happened in that. That started after the Civil War, and it started with Carlisle School in Pennsylvania, and they were trying to make kill the Indian and save the man was their. And the man who started it was I guess he was a colonel, but Pratt, and there was a method to try to get our Native folks to be normal citizens. So that basically the government and oftentimes sent children to boarding schools by either coercion or holding back funding and stuff like that.
Amy. Sorry. Margaret. Cheryl. Do you have a question?
Yeah, where is the tomb of Jesus? Is it in Israel or Egypt or?
What a good question.
It is a good question. Garden of Gethsemane and those places which we hear about in both John's Gospel and Luke's and others are still there. The truth of it is they argue over which is the real one, the right one, and the wrong one. My husband worked with archaeologists who did a lot of Middle Eastern archaeology, and they're really, they have a system, they think this is the right place, but as you know, as generations pass, it wasn't important at that point. They weren't going to memorialize it. They weren't going to take care of it. So who knows whether it's really the right place or the wrong place.
Okay. Thank you.
But it is
Thanks, Cheryl.
in Israel,
Jerusalem.
in Jerusalem. But they, where they have made a shrine may or may not be the right place.
Right.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Amy?
When you started bringing up about the boarding school, because there's a lot right now going on in Canada about that. I'm just wondering if you want to speak to just, not just among Indigenous peoples, but also African Americans, who many of whom adopted very much the Christian church as a path to understanding their own salvation and their hopes for freedom. As we see so many good things that came from that union, certainly, there were so many bad things that happened to folks as a result of sort of the patriarchal decisions forced upon these people. And I wonder how you managed to sit with that while seeing the bad and also embracing what was good.
Well, just so you know, H. Mark, our wonderful deacon here, is also one of the co-chairs of our Racial Justice Commission. And one of the things we really try to do is soberly look at our history, whether it's our local church, whether it's the diocese, and also tell the true stories instead of the ones we like to hear, some of the folks that we, in our American history, that we make into great saints of the American tradition, also were and slave owners and abusive, and it doesn't make them necessarily less important, but we have to be honest about our history. And so we're doing a lot of work about talking about how the church has, in many ways, either destroyed or assumed the culture of folks, Native, African American, Caribbean. We have a variety of, and from Africa, we have a lot of variety of people from across the world in this part of the world. And how do we be a church? And this is a question we're asking. How do we be a church that really actually honors the diversity rather than says you need to be like me or I'm gonna, push you away? And we've done that unintentionally. And so we're learning, we're training folks to help people to figure out how to do that in a way that is life-giving for us all. We can't fix our history. We just have to embrace, we just have to say that happened. And we have to also say, what can we learn from it and what can we do differently so we don't repeat patterns unintentionally? So, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Some of the work we're doing?
Yeah, and the thing I would say to add to that is that we can't change our history, but we can uncover our history and honestly look at our history and then discern how we respond to that and how we can repair the breach. One of the things that we're doing right now is digging into some of the history that, the reality is that that we all are in institutions that have benefited economically from enslaved labor. Either, and maybe not, in some cases directly, but the folks that didn't own slaves were making plenty of money in shipbuilding and lumber and selling fish to the plantations in the Caribbean. And we didn't have cotton plantations, but we had cotton mills that were only economically viable because of the enslaved labor. And so beginning to peel back that onion in a way that is honest and courageous and doesn't flip people out and they start acting like Florida. At a certain point, if the truth gets too scary, I'm just going to run from it. And that's not what we want.
Yeah, we don't want people to feel defensive.
No.
I mean, we live in, for example, we live in Haverhill, and as you go down the Merrimack River, you know that every single town had a mill of some sort. We were the shoe city. And much of the labor that came in was obviously not slave labor, but all of those mill owners and everything benefited from all the slave labor in the islands and other places. And many of the people that came to work were coming with desperate need, and also abused because, you know, the folks who were making all the money off it knew they could pay them little or nothing and all those kinds of, so, and all of us, in some ways as a church, participated in that, you know, historically. There was a big mill here too. So, I mean, and we wanna not, as you say, freak people out. We don't wanna make anybody defensive, because you can't do anything about it. I try to remind folks, you can't choose who your parents were, okay? But we can choose how we go forward, and with an honest way of looking at things. Great question.
Great question.
Others?
You know, I'm sorry to jump in again, but when you said that, what I thought of was, you know, if you grow up in an alcoholic household, you know, that wasn't your fault. But with years of therapy, you will understand how that has impacted you and begin to learn different ways of being.
No,
And that's kind of where we're at it.
Well, it is.
Trying to
That's
do
what
some of that hard therapy.
Yeah. And unpacking what those things we can be responsible for going forward. One of the other things that H. Mark and others are working on, we have a Indigenous Justice Task Force. Are we still a task force? Network. And in October, we had our first Indigenous Peoples Day gathering in Plymouth, which seemed very appropriate. And we had a really wonderful turnout, a lot of good educational pieces out of that. And we are doing it with Western Massachusetts. So in October, it's going to be in Worcester. Okay. So it's placed, and all of those things are recorded, and we'll make them available so that folks can learn about those things that have been going on in the diocese.
Yeah, the recordings of those sessions from last year are on the diocesan website. If you look for the page on immigrant and multicultural ministry, that office run by Jean-Baptiste has the videos.
Gail.
Yes, I was thinking, kind of to drill back into this idea of polarization and contentious conversations, and I've been really kind of grappling with that a little bit. In my own family, we have very different beliefs about guns. We have very different beliefs about law enforcement. And I grapple with how to have the conversation where you know there's kind of, at a certain point, you kind of lay it on the table, but if you lay it on the table, you risk breaking the relationship. So I guess I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about that, because I just feel like it's something that feels very impossible in our society today.
It's, I just, where we are right now is so polarized. And I don't, I understand somewhat how we got there, but when I was 12, my dad stayed in the reserves in the Navy. He was a Navy chaplain, so we spent a good bit of time in North Carolina at Camp Lejeune, and we were on the rifle range. So on the 4th of July, everybody they have a big picnic for all of us and all that kind of stuff, and we got to shoot M16s.
At 12.
At 12. What was I doing with an M16? It was for fun, but I know the power of that rifle, which is not an assault rifle, the assault rifle is like 10 times more powerful, okay? And the recoil, you had to lay on the ground. They told you how to, lay on the ground, and I've been thinking, like, I didn't have any control of that weapon, we were just target practice. But a hurting person with something that they can barely control, it just has so much power. We all have had moments in our history where we're angry and we want to lash out. I understand that entirely. And a weapon in the hand of an angry young person is just, or an angry old person, or it's just really dangerous. So how do we talk about that with folks? Because Mark and I have spent time in both Montana and Alaska and North Dakota, where the guns are part of the lifestyle. A lot of the native folks are subsistence hunting, but there's a different understanding of the use of a weapon, and people don't go out and shoot deer or elk or anything with assault weapons. So the question is how do we help people understand that and put in place laws that help people who are really angry and hurt and unstable not have those tools? And I don't know. I wish I had a simple answer. I know that when the assault weapons were banned, when we had it in place for how long, 8 or 10 years?
94 to 204.
There you go, about 10 years. There was not the mass shootings that we have now. But, in the interpersonal family stuff, I don't know how to, you just have to choose to have, say I love you when we have different opinions. It has been made such a flashpoint right now that I think I would avoid entirely. But I think it's because people have, social media, all those things have put people at odds with each other who shouldn't be at odds with each other. We need to save our kids. Teachers shouldn't be worried about teaching. Kids shouldn't be worried about going to school. And, folks shouldn't be worried about knocking on the wrong door by accident. But we're in a very, my job, I think, all of our jobs, is to disempower that kind of polarity. To try to love across lines and not be so strident that we don't listen to other people. And it's basically an environment of fear right now. We fear the other when the other is actually much more like us than we know. So any way we can undo that.
Disempower the polarity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karen. George.
Can you comment a little on how you think we're doing in the diocese of period and feeling like we have some growth. I'm not sure everybody feels that way. I think we're looking for a little bit of a pep talk.
I actually think you're doing great. There are places that are really struggling across this diocese. There are places that are not. One of the things that I think, and I'm sure you had it here, it was very hard for people to come back to church after so long COVID and being at home for two reasons. One is there's a lot of fear and anxiety about it. And the other thing is, I'll confess, we all got comfy in our jammies watching church, okay? We're doing church. I mean, the truth of it is, there were services that I did and other people did, that we were in clericals from the top and we were in our jammies from the bottom.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't know. Shocking. You couldn't tell anybody. What I'm saying is, there was so much to deal with. I mean, just going to the grocery store for a couple of years, we got in a body space of feeling anxious. And so I think one of the things we're seeing across the diocese is there are more anxious places and less anxious places. The more you can do to just make sure your doors are open, make sure you're inviting people in, and let people come in as they are. Those places are really doing really well. We're doing a lot of collaborations, and I'm sure Martha's talked to you about some of them, but one of the ones that I helped set up before I moved into this role, St. Mark's in Dorchester and St. Bart's in Cambridge. St. Bart's in Cambridge was without a regular priest for about 3.5 years. Right at the beginning of COVID, their priest got really sick, and she was in the hospital for a long period of time, and they were just trying to do morning prayer, and then they had, a priest do it from home, but they didn't have anybody regular, it was just supply. And now they are working with St. Mark's in Dorchester, and it's a little bit of a distance, but Father Zachary is doing early service at St. Bart's and the later service at St. Mark's. St. Mark's has grown, about doubled since Zachary has been there. And Zachary told me that they had 120 people at St. Bart's on Sunday for Easter.
Oh, wow, that's pretty nice.
So, as long as you love people are enthusiastic, we're gonna get all through it. And lots of places are finding ways to do, creative things. One of the most but on accident, as my children like to say, that happened is a lot of people, after we could be together, but we had to be outside, that a lot of people have kept doing outside things, just so they're visible, not all the time. I mean, they have regular Sunday services maybe, but they'll do once a month service outside. People realize that then their neighbors driving by think, oh, what's going on there? Because, and so all of those things are really doing great. Financially, like here, like everywhere, folks are struggling, honestly. The cost of living is really difficult, and we have a lot of parishes that only have half-time or less. They can only pay their priest half-time or less. And but we've had a lot of developing relationships, so people are either sharing a priest or finding ways to we're talking about also building teams so that there'll be 2 or 3 clergy, priest and deacon to serve a couple of congregations and help people. But it looks like you're growing. I mean, despite all that you've been through, I think COVID's regularized, but we're still not done with that anxiety, that fear, and all those things. And the fact that we all have learned how to be online, and people can come from California and visit, or they can come to church even if they've retired and moved away. I think we're going to see great things come out of that, but we're still in that sort of on the edge time, and not to get fearful and not to get frightened, but just say, okay, you know, we gotta come up
So
with
we
new
are.
ways of doing things, and you've done it. I mean, you know, you figured that out here very beautifully, so.
You want to answer your question?
Sure. Or we can, I can answer.
Okay.
I have one from online from
Okay,
Denise Mallon, who said, I am currently in the Sacred Ground program, which is just outstanding. I think many people I know would love to learn about this and especially watch the excellent videos and of course view the readings. Is it possible to make the course materials available to non-Episcopal Church attendees, but really to be able to just to view and learn on their own time?
Yes.
Yes. The
Thank
answer
you, Denise.
Thank you.
Yes, all of that is distributed through the Episcopal Church at the denominational level. And it's, so if you go on their website and Google or search within the Episcopal Church website, Sacred Ground, you'll find it.
And basically anybody can.
Yeah,
Anybody
anybody
can-
can, they're not, you know, yeah,
They're not limiting it, so
welcome.
it's not like you have to like show your Episcopal badge
No.
or anything.
But to my understanding, what they are a little protective of is the methodology of the course. So that, you know, studying in groups with trained facilitators, making a commitment to the series, those sorts of things, they really, I think, strongly encourage.
She's just asking, she says she thinks you need a password on that national to be able to see it.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
Thanks,
you know,
Denise.
Or we'll get a kid to,
Yeah, hack into it.
We didn't hear her say that.
I didn't say that. I'm always amazed at what certain people can get access to. so.
Yes, yes. So we do have the two groups in conjunction with Brian
Oh,
Risch and
nice.
Good Shepherd.
Oh, that's
It's
great.
Just finishing, right?
And I think, you know, it's built so that people can actually talk to one another and share what they're feeling and thinking and what they're learning. I mean, people often have come up to me and, you know, in communities that are doing Sacred Ground and said, I had no idea about this or that. And
Right.
that's the truth.
Mhm.
It wasn't in our curriculum as children. We weren't taught these things. You couldn't take this course in college. I mean, most of the stuff was just what those of us who have studied Christian ed and curriculum development is called the null curriculum, which is the non-existent, but it's non-existent for a reason. You make a choice as to what you leave out. And it's a, you know, because we're still wondering, you know, when it's really going to get into the mainstream, but we're getting closer.
Yeah. Thanks, Denise. If you haven't had dessert, it's time for you all to have dessert. And we're going to thank Carol right now, and then the vestry is going to meet with her, and she's going to bestow even more wisdom on us, on your elected leaders. So let's thank Carol for her time.
Thank you for your time as well.
Thank you for everything.
It's just a
everyone.
register.
Thank you.
And once you register, they just want to know who's your basically.
Great, I'll let her.
You have access to it.